Starting at early day, we traveled till about 11 o'clock a.m. and halted for breakfast. The teams were scarcely turned to graze when a dense band of buffalo cows made their appearance from the back prairie, wending their way towards the river. Expectation was on tiptoe, and all appetites doubly sharpened for an anticipated feast, as our hunter and his assistant started to intercept the witless animals at the river bank. The two placed themselves in a chosen position and awaited the heavily moving throng, which soon advanced to within shooting distance. The sharp crack of a rifle now stopped their headway, and caused them to recoil a few paces, leaving one of their number struggling in death. And another discharge followed, and the affrighted herd were seen flying from their concealed enemy with all the energy that innate dread of danger and death lent to their ready feet. But not until another victim had danked the sod with the unsought libation of his heart's blood. It pained me as I came up to witness the noble beasts as they lay extended upon the gore-dyed ground, but the present was no time for regret. We were to feed upon their carcasses. Having traveled some 15 miles, chance threw in our way a doe elk with her fawn, which the unerring aim of a rifle speedily laid dead before us. Soon as opened, the liver disappeared at the demands of voracious appetites, and next to it the marrow bones and kidneys. Towards night, on reaching a small stream called Horseshoe Creek, we struck camp. One of the party having killed a buck deer, we were promptly on hand, and not at all backward in obeying the calls of appetite, sharpened by a continuous abstinence of 3 days. Deer meat at this season of the year is very poor eating, especially that of the buck, it being both lean and tough. But, indifferent as it was, we were too hungry to be nice. The valley gave abundant indication of wild fruit at the proper season, such as plums, cherries, currants, goose, and buffalo berries. The signs of game were very plentiful, particularly elk. After camp, 2 or 3 of us sallied out with our rifles in quest of these wary animals, while others were busily employed in digging for roots to appease the gnawing of appetite, which began to make itself most sensibly felt by all. About sundown both parties came in, the hunters quite dispirited, not having seen anything in the shape of elk or other game. But the root diggers had been more lucky, and brought with them a small supply of nutritious aliments, which were divided equally among the company, and through scarcely a half-dozen mouthfuls were apportioned to each. They answered to some extent the designed object. These roots consisted of 2 varieties, Pomme Blanche and Camote. The Pomme Blanche, or white apple, is a native of the prairies and mountains, oval-shaped and about 3½ inches in circumference. It is encased in a thin fibrous tegument, which, when removed, exposes an interior of white pulpy substance, much like a turnip in taste. It generally grows at a depth of 3 or 4 inches in a soil of hillsides and plateaus, where is found a reddish clay loam abundant in fragmentary rocks and gravel. The stalk attains a height of about 3 inches, and in general description is quite like a well-known article common to the States called sheep sorrel. At the proper season it bears a handsome white blossom that would suffer no disparagement when placed in juxtaposition with many of the choicer specimens of our gardens. All hands now turned out in search of game, one of whom returned towards night with an antelope, providing us with a needful supply of food for the time being. The next day, forcing our craft onward for 6 or 8 miles, we brought to upon the left shore, where, after a short excursion among the hills, 2 other antelope were brought in, which furnished us with a further supply of provisions. The prairie owl and rattlesnake maintained friendly relations with these inoffensive villagers, and not infrequently the 3 heterogeneous associates occupy the same subterranean apartments, a strange companionship of birds, beasts, and reptiles. The prairie dog is extremely tenacious of life, and can seldom be killed with a rifle unless by a brain shot, and then, even, it is difficult to secure him, as his companions will immediately convey the carcass into their holes beyond reach. The flesh of these animals is tender and quite palatable, and their oil superior in fineness, and absence from all grosser ingredients, to that of any other known animals. It is highly valued as a medicine in certain cases. During the interval, we were successful in killing 2 very fat bulls, and were thus enabled to renew the series of feasting which had graced the greater part of our journey. I here became for the first time acquainted with a kind of beverage very common among the mountaineers. The article alluded to may with much propriety be termed bitters, as the reader will readily acknowledge on learning the nature of its principal ingredient. It is prepared by the following simple process. With 1 pint of water, mix 1/4 gill of buffalo gall, and you will then have before you a wholesome and exhilarating drink. To a stomach unaccustomed to its use, it may at first create a slightly noisome sensation, like the inceptive effects of an emetic, and to one strongly bilious, it might cause vomiting. But on the 2nd or 3rd trial, the stomach attains a taste for it, and receives it with no inconsiderable relish. Upon the whole system, its effects are beneficial. As a stimulant, it braces the nerves without producing a corresponding relaxation on the cessation of its influence. It also tends to restore an impaired appetite and invigorate the digestive powers. We were entertained very kindly by our new friends, who spared no effort to render our stay agreeable. Among the delicacies set before us was one deserving of notice. It consisted of the fruit of prickly pears boiled in water for some 10 or 12 hours till it became perfectly soft, when it was compressed through a thin cloth into a fluid in which it had been boiled. This forms a delicious variety in mountain fare, and one highly stimulating and nutritious. The immense quantities of cacti fruit found near the mountains at the proper season render the above an entertainment not uncommon. Our horses, too, had become so exhausted from hard fare and previous service, we were necessitated to travel on foot for most of the distance. But the grand climax of miseries was experienced through lack of food. A scanty supply of buffalo meat, taken with us at the outset, was consumed at the next meal, and we were left without one morsel to appease the gnawings of appetite for the 2 days and 3 nights succeeding. A straggling wolf that chanced through in our way at the expiration of this time most luckily furnished us with a breakfast, though nothing further entered our mouths till the morning of the 3rd day from this, when, coming to the site of a recent Indian encampment, we succeeded in gathering a few pieces of dry buffalo hide that lay scattered about. So hard and tough the wolves had tried in vain to gnaw them. These, after being boiled some 12 to 14 hours, afforded us a paltry substitute for something better, but of so glutinous a nature it almost cemented the teeth employed in its mastication. The 2 days following we were again doomed to go hungry, and began to talk seriously of the imminent danger of starving to death. This interval had brought us into the canyon of De las Aminas, where, having struck camp, several of the men sought a temporary respite from the torments of hunger by eating roasted cacti. The article at first tasted well, and from the recommendation of the essayists, several were induced to partake of it quite heartily. But the lapse of a brief hour or two brought with it the tug of war, when the inherent properties of the cacti began to have their effect upon the enervated systems of the participants. The painful consequences of this strange diet at first were a weakness in the joints, succeeded by a severe trembling and a desire to vomit, accompanied with an almost insufferable pain in the stomach and bowels. 3 or 4 of the unfortunate sufferers were in such extreme pain they rolled upon the ground for agony, with countenances writhing in every imaginable shape of frightful distortion. Hereupon it was decided to sacrifice one of our animals as a last resort, which was promptly done, and we ended our fast of nearly 7 days' continuance with a feast of mule meat. I had heretofore cherished a decided repugnance to this kind of food, but am in justice bound to say it proved both sweet and tender, and scarcely inferior to beef. The supply thus obtained lasted till we came among buffalo, when ample amends were made for previous abstinence.